Wednesday, July 16th, 2008. Garrett pulled on the bloody rag to cinch it tight around his calf.
Shit!
He sat behind a dumpster, thinking he had a moment's peace to catch his breath, but the crimson strand which flowed all the way down to his shoe told him otherwise. He looked down the alley and saw several splatters of his own blood leading to him.
I'm so fucking stupid!
There was no way to know how long he had been leaving the perfect trail for Zuri to follow, so he would have to assume the worst-case scenario in which she would be upon him at any moment. He took a quick survey of his immediate surroundings, seeing that it was a typical back alley of Chicago that he knew so well. Trash, dumpsters, more trash, dim lighting, and a fire escape. It was already too late for Garrett to roll around in the garbage to mask his scent. His blood was on the ground, and Zuri knew his scent better than anyone. His only option was to hide, but staying on the ground level to wait for an Arun to come find you was pretty much the worst idea anyone could have. Garrett took his best option and headed for the fire escape. He double-checked his improvised bandage to ensure it wouldn't track blood up the ladder. The cut burned like fire and stabbed like 1,000 needles each time Garrett planted a foot on a rung. He did his best to stifle any grunts and eventually reached the first landing. He took a moment to gather himself and let the pain subside before tackling the next ladder. Fortunately, these buildings weren't skyscrapers, and he reached the roof after making it up 2 more ladders. From the edge of the roof, he had a clear view of the alley, but getting a view of the main street was impossible, as the street side of the buildings consisted of tall facades that couldn't be seen over.
Even the city likes to look tougher than it actually is.
Garrett looked up to Luna and felt his inner rage stir. He tapped into it and felt his frame contort and his jaw lengthen as he shifted into the lupus form. His dedicated clothing melded into the fur that sprang from his body, but the tourniquet rag fell away and exposed his bleeding wound. The cut was clean and precise and still stung, despite the enhanced regeneration that his monstrous, non-human forms provided. He sat along the edge of the roof to wait for his predator to walk into his crappy, improvised, and unintended trap. As he waited, he occasionally licked his wound before the blood welled up enough to drip down his leg, whimpering slightly at the pain each time. He watched the alley below intently, trying to block the horrible stench of the garbage below that was amplified by his heightened wolf senses. After 5 minutes of waiting, he began to wonder if he had made a mistake in remaining still, but quickly shook off his doubts.
No, Zuri's too good of a tracker. She'll be here soon.
Garrett fought to keep his eyes open as his body's effort to heal the wound began to take its toll. However, a noise from the alley's entrance jostled him back to an alert state, and he could now see the silhouette of someone tall and athletic.
There she is.
Zuri took long, ponderous strides into the alley as her head looked down at Garrett's trail of blood. Once she had stepped out of the light and into the complete shadow of the alley, her form hunched down into a lithe wolf that sniffed at the ground while continuing to move deeper within.
That's it. Keep coming.
Garrett slowly lifted himself up, once again agitating his wound as Zuri drew closer to his vantage point.
This is your only shot. Be quick. Be silent.
Garrett positioned himself to pounce, but Zuri came to a halt well away from his perch and growled menacingly in the Guru tongue.
I know you're here, Cosma. I know you can hear me, and I know you can see me.
She's gonna start monologuing. I'll have to go to her then.
Garrett relaxed and quietly moved to a position closer to Zuri. She was every bit the powerful warrior that her auspice demanded she be, but her verbal skills were severely lacking. All of her attempts to get under Garrett's skin with insults would fall flat and leave herself wide open to a witty remark that would provoke her to a near frenzy and then proceed to render Garrett bloodied and unconscious. It still hadn't quite clicked in her head that she didn't need to win a war of words to best him, so she kept trying.
I know you're lurking somewhere in these shadows, waiting to ambush me like the coward you are. It won't work.
Probably not, but at least you won't see the first hit coming.
You know I begged Silencing Eyes Raya not to split you open with silver. I said it will make it too easy. You might as well just make him fight in the day. He just laughed.
Of course he did. He's an asshole.
Garrett continued to make his way towards a spot where he could descend upon her.
So here I am, wasting my time with a challenge far below me. I know you want to attack me from behind. So just get on with it so I can get back to doing something more productive. I'll even spin in place to expose myself.
Garrett was not one to refuse such a generous offer. He positioned himself and waited for the proverbial clock to strike 12.
Be quick. Be silent.
He arched forward and was about to launch himself, but Zuri spoke once more.
Come, Cosma. I'm as defenseless as your little brother.
Garrett could no longer think. His vision turned red. He roared as he jumped off the ledge towards Zuri. She instantly whipped around to face him, and her form grew. A single Krynos hand caught Garrett by the throat in midair and slammed his wolf form into the wall, pinning him there. He thrashed madly and felt her grip tighten as she arrogantly growled.
Surrender.
Garrett responded by shifting to Krynos. Zuri brought her other hand to Garrett's throat to maintain a strong grip. Garrett instinctively grabbed Zuri's wrist, desperately trying to pull her hands away. His claws dug into Zuri's arms, but her strength was unrelenting. She grew agitated and barked at him.
Surrender!
Garrett looked at her with rage-filled eyes, but felt his strength being sapped. The small amount of air left in his lungs was being expelled with grunts of agony. His strength faded, and his arms began to slump to his sides. The red in his vision slowly transitioned to black. Zuri's contemptuous sneer was the last thing Garrett saw before darkness swallowed the world. He now found himself spinning in pitch blackness, falling endlessly to some unknown destination as the vast shadow around him boiled and bubbled, threatening to coalesce into horrible truths.
Just stay down.
Garrett began wildly turning to find the source of the voice. He looked in the direction that he thought was down and saw a pair of glowing eyes peering through holes in the dark. Their light gave texture to their surroundings, revealing a face pushing against a curtain of shadow and opening a jaw, ready to devour him. Garrett thrashed, futilely trying to influence the direction he was falling, but felt only a sudden blast of pain in his cheek. There was another shock, then another, followed by the void being flooded with dim light. Garrett opened his eyes. He felt the cold concrete of the alley touching one cheek, and his blurry vision could only make out a humanoid shape standing before him. His other cheek felt nothing but pain. He brought up a Hamid hand to wipe his face. It was wet. His eyes slowly refocused, revealing Zuri with a blood-soaked fist.
You're awake. Good. I refuse to carry you back to Set.
Garrett tried to speak as he slowly rose to a kneeling position, but pain seized the words within his crushed windpipe. He grimaced and brought a hand to his throat. Zuri let out an amused grunt.
I should do that to you more often. The silence is welcome.
Garrett painfully sighed in defeat. He tried to bring himself to his feet, but the pain in his leg served to remind him of the still fresh silver wound. He braced himself on the alley wall.
Silencing Eyes Raya wanted to speak to us after. I suggest you stay here and heal that throat.
Zuri wiped the bloody hands on the inside of her shirt, and she began to exit the alley. She spoke one last time.
Don't worry. I'll be sure to tell him all about your failure here.
Garrett's fist clenched and impotently pounded the wall as Zuri turned the corner and disappeared from sight.
She got to me. So stupid.
He limped into a nook and shifted to his glabro form. The knots on his face shrunk, and his throat began to retwist itself to its original position. The sensation of regeneration was unpleasant as always. The silver cut on his leg refused to heal, and would remain until tomorrow, provided he slept in a form other than Hamid. For now, Garrett would have to make do with tearing another sleeve off his shirt for a makeshift tourniquet. He slumped against the wall and buried his face into his hands. He began to unconsciously shift back to the Hamid form as he thought about what awaited him on Sept.
It's gonna hurt. You deserve it. I need to get up. You need to stay down.
The desire to sleep in that dirty nook was great, but Garrett knew he had no choice but to quickly return to receive his reward for failure. He pulled himself up and began to limp back to the Sept of the Windcatchers. Garrett knew Chicago like the back of his hand after spending years as a kinfolk spy. What route he would take to any given location would change depending on the time of night. He knew every back alley, every unlit parking lot, and when they would be least populated. Given his current disheveled appearance, he could easily blend in as just another one of Chicago's unfortunate. Garrett learned early on from watching the Bone Gnars that even Gaia's greatest gifts of stealth couldn't rival the power of humanity to ignore the impoverished. Before too long, Garrett found himself in familiar surroundings. In the aftermath of the 1993 war, all of Chicago's Guru united into one giant sept, known as the Sept of the Clear Skies. But old habits die hard, and the name Clear Skies was only ever used when the forces of the Phantom and the Windcatchers attended formal gatherings. The Sept of the Windcatchers resided in beautiful Hyde Park, and unlike in the city proper, Garrett now stuck out like a sore thumb. He hurried to the Sept House, a large building that blended in with the rest of Hyde Park, and allowed for the Guru to have a base of operations to keep an eye on the nearby cairn. The Sept Guardians patrolled the area, sneering at him as he walked by.
They all know.
He ignored them and entered the building. Inside was a modestly decorated lobby, a facade to obscure the fact that monsters resided within. He made his way to the basement, a dimly lit labyrinth where most of the supernatural activity occurred. He opened the door to the Denfather's office and was greeted by three heads all turning to face him. Zuri wore a devious smile and knelt before the other two. One of the others was Chainkill, the Glasswalker Denfather, who stepped forward and extended a fully tattooed arm to point an accusatory finger at Garrett.
You sure took your sweet-ass time getting back, Cosma.
Silence. The voice of the third person in the room cut through the tension and replaced it with dread. Garrett shivered at the sound, felt himself shrink, and instantly dropped to his knees as Marcel's silencing eyes Gorecki walked in front of Chainkill. The Denfather's face twisted into angered frustration.
These are my cubs, Marcel. I've already let you get involved in this exercise more than I should have, so why don't you just...
The Shadow Lord's head spun around to face Chainkill, instantly stopping the tirade. Garrett could not see his expression, but he didn't need to. Marcel's countenances were forever burned in his memory. The low growl and menace in Marcel's voice was enough to express his displeasure. Unfortunately, Marcel was never interested in just enough. Garrett could hear the soft creaking of leather from Marcel tightening his grip on the hilt of his clave, which had already tasted blood once tonight. Garrett could only look to the ground as a futile attempt to escape the situation. That's once you defy me. Leave. Chainkill drew his mouth in tight and let out a blast of hot air from his nostrils, but he, like everyone else, knew when to stand down. He looked away from Marcel and stomped out of the room, slamming the door behind him. Zuri's smile remained as she spoke.
He knows everything, Cosma. He knows all about how I bested you again.
Garrett's fist clenched as the fresh memories of the evening were called to the surface. He should have been silent, because she was right, and terror stood only a few feet away waiting to beat him down. However, something in his head refused to let him. It was a slight discomfort that had been with Garrett his entire life, but was stronger ever since he changed. That feeling couldn't let her words go unopposed, and he needed to satiate it. Does he also know about your arrogance? That you willingly turned your back to the enemy? Pain shocked Garrett, first from a familiar boot to the head, followed by that same head bouncing off the floor. The pain turned from stinging to dull as Marcel spoke. Still having issues holding your tongue in my presence, Garrett.
Still don't know your plays?
Garrett's blurred vision could barely make out Marcel's frame turning away to face Zuri. You disappoint me, Zuri. You'd be dead if it was anyone other than this pathetic whelp. We will speak more later. Garrett's vision began to clear up just in time to see Zuri's scowl directed his way. She spoke through gritted teeth.
Yes, silencing eyes, Raya.
Garrett wouldn't wish a talk with Marcel upon anyone, not even the one who left him broken in an alley no more than an hour ago. It wouldn't do any good to show remorse in front of either of them, but it was there.
I'm sorry, Zuri.
The lesson needed to be learned, though, and Marcel had spoken the truth of the lesson before Garrett could spit the blood out of his mouth. A hand grabbed him by the neck, jerked him upward, and forced him to awkwardly find his footing. You're coming with me to the glen. Walk. Garrett, still slightly dazed from the blow to the head, was unprepared for the shove Marcel gave him, which caused him to stumble to his knees. Any delay would be met with pain, so Garrett quickly reached for the doorknob and simultaneously opened it while using it to pull himself up. Garrett wanted to know why they were going to the glen, the most sacred spot within the sept. It was normally where spiritual instruction was held, since the gauntlet was thinnest there. Perhaps Marcel would collude with a crescent moon to have the spirits curse Garrett for his failure, but that would be far too indirect for Marcel, who favored brutal public displays of dominance. Marcel's looming presence was one of the few things in the world that could shut down his curiosity, however, and urge Garrett to march forward in silence. The Glen was located on a small island in nearby Jackson Park and was under constant patrol by guardians and shrouded from hostile spirits by ancient rites. There was no place in the city more green than the Glen, and its peaceful atmosphere was a place for reflection and healing, which served to remind the Garou of what they fought for. A man awaited them at the water's edge of the island. He wore typical business attire with rolled-up sleeves and knelt at the ground, arranging black feathers in a circular pattern. Garrett recognized the man was Anton Greywalk, a Thayurge and Marcel's tribe mate. Anton stood as Garrett approached with his chaperone behind him. He slapped his hands together, dusting them off, then spoke casually.
"So, are you ready?"
Garrett had no clue what he was meant to be ready for, but he didn't want to look completely foolish. He took a quick catalog of the circumstances before answering.
We're in the Glen, with a Thayurge present, and some kind of ritual preparation on the ground. A summoning?
He was not ready to face a spirit. It didn't matter if Garrett's original prediction of punishment was right, or if this was just another lesson for a cub. Spirits were fickle creatures, bound by their nature to act in a certain way, and had easily offended sensibilities. Without knowing anything about what kind of spirit he'd face, Garrett would be wandering blindly into a potentially dangerous situation. The fact that a Shadow Lord was the administrator almost guaranteed it. Garrett replied, doing his best to sound confident.
I'm ready to deal with the spirit.
Anton slowly smiled and furrowed his brow into a scrutinizing gaze. He had a reputation on Sept as a professional bullshit artist, and was renowned for his ability to both sell and recognize lies and subterfuge.
The spirit, huh? The spirit which you are going to deal with. Marcel, did you really not tell him what he was going to be doing tonight?
Anton's eyes never moved from Garrett, even when he addressed Marcel. Garrett was caught off guard by his response, and knew that all of his uncertainty was being soaked in by Anton's stare. There was no audible reply from Marcel to Anton's inquiry, so he continued.
You're presenting yourself to our patron for acceptance.
Garrett could not conceal his surprise. His eyes widened and his mouth opened just enough to let the summer air into his lungs, as the number of emotions swirling around his head overwhelmed and confused him. Was this a prank? If the totem accepted him, then he would undertake his rite of passage, gaining rank and status as one of Thunder's children. However, the Shadow Lords abhorred weakness, and reminded Garrett of his own every day and night.
Why would the Shadow Lords offer me a place?
A force rammed into Garrett's back, knocking him face first into the grass. No doubt it was Marcel's boot.
Silence. No matter our objections, the elders have forced our hand.
Yep, you're kin. So they say we have to give you a shot. Now get up and step sideways so I can perform the rite of summoning. I'd like to get home soon.
Garrett came to the realization that this was a setup. He was wounded, drained from his exercise with Zuri, and unprepared to face the totem spirit of the Shadow Lords. They didn't want him, and took measures for him to fail.
That's a lot of trouble just to sabotage someone already destined to fail.
No! That nagging sensation in the back of his head came back. That desire to question.
No. They didn't sabotage me enough.
Garrett pushed himself up to his knees and crawled to the water.
Pathetic.
Marcel's comment added fuel to that desire. If they wanted him gone, they would have to work harder. Garrett always suspected he would end up with the Bone Gnars after being rejected by every other tribe, and he had made peace with that. But he was now given an opportunity to teach a lesson, and an added level of spite for Marcel made the deal that much sweeter. He saw his reflection in the moonlit water and focused on it. For many Garou, it was easy to step sideways into the Umbra, the spiritual reflection of Gaia. Garrett never quite got the hang of it, and it felt like he was swimming through tar every time he crossed. The thin gauntlet of the Glen made it a little easier though, and he soon felt the odd sensation of fading out of one existence and into another. The vibrant green of the Glen was even more stark and beautiful in the Umbra. The moment's peace away from Marcel's gaze pushed Garrett's adrenaline down and allowed the sting of the silver wound to resurface. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand, just in time to notice a circle of light beginning to dimly glow on the ground, corresponding to where the black feathers resided on the other side.
You're not ready.
Dark clouds manifested in the umbral sky, and rolling thunder shook the very ground.
You'll never be ready. Fuck you.
A bolt of lightning blasted the inside of the glowing circle, which made Garrett raise one hand to shield his eyes. The visible electricity crackled and swirled about the ground, singeing the grass and coalescing into the form of a bird. The raw power faded, and Garrett dropped his hand to see a large black crow which looked at him with curiosity. Garrett returned the quizzical look and spoke.
"You're not Grandfather Thunder."
The crow repeatedly cawed and flapped its wings, laughing at Garrett's statement of the obvious. It walked out of the circle and paced around as Garrett reevaluated his situation. Though he wasn't a Theurge, he had been around Shadowlords long enough to know of the Storm Crows, who flocked to and cowered before the powerful, making them natural servants of Grandfather Thunder. They were Thunder's eyes and ears, and this crow would carry the message of Garrett's worth. The crow eventually stopped pacing, and Garrett noticed that something had caught its attention. It no longer looked him in the eye, and instead appeared to focus on his bleeding leg.
"It sees your weakness."
Garrett shifted his stance and put his wounded leg behind him and out of the crow's view. It looked Garrett in the eyes and cocked its head at his audacity, then paced around once more in an attempt to sate its curiosity. Garrett pivoted, refusing to give the crow a single peek. It quickened its pace, and Garrett matched. The crow loudly cawed in frustration and spread its wings. Garrett bared his teeth and challenged the crow. "You will not see it." The crow flapped its wings and launched itself at Garrett. He raised his hands to block the incoming assault and felt the crow peck at his scalp as it flew by. He spun around to ensure the crow didn't get what it sought, and tried to spot its whereabouts before the next assault. The storm crow was much faster than any normal bird, however, and its sharp beak pecked at Garrett's cheek before he could react. The assault continued, and he flailed his arms to no avail. Garrett grew frustrated and felt the rage burn inside him. He grasped it and felt it rush through every fiber of his being, forcing his body to take the shape of a wolf. He used his new quickness to get away from the crow, and used his new senses to find it. He used his new jaws to growl and to bite at it, getting closer and closer to taking it into his maw each time it flew by. The crow moved slower and more cautiously, knowing the predator would soon devour it. The pain of Garrett's wound was masked by his desire to deny the crow. Garrett soon gained the edge and chased after the crow, forcing it to fly high away from him. He made sure to keep the crow in front of him and snapped his jaws if the crow dared to move behind. It did not try any longer, and instead perched itself on the tree and waited. Even when the crow appeared to give up, Garrett did not take his attention away. He stared at the crow with wolf eyes and growled. The crow was not going to get what it wanted, so it flew high into the clouds and vanished as streaks of lightning cascaded throughout the darkened sky. A loud crack of thunder nearly deafened Garrett, and he instinctively shifted back to Hamid so he could cover his ears. The thunder echoed through the city and left silence in its wake, which then ended with the light tapping of rain droplets. Garrett wasn't quite sure if his ordeal was over. He waited for any further sign, but only received heavier rain. The cold water offered respite from the summer heat, and he felt the grime of the city wash away from his skin. And though the pain in his leg throbbed once again, Garrett was more at peace with himself than he had ever been. He figured Grandfather Thunder must have departed, because one should not feel comfort in his presence. With that, he limped over to the water's edge, found his reflection in the rain-stirred water, and stepped sideways. He was greeted in the physical realm by more rain and the sound of Anton's laughter.
Can you believe it, Marcel? A sign from Grandfather. It seems we have a rite of passage to prepare. I gotta go tell the council about this. I have to see the look on their faces.
Garrett turned toward the two fully ranked Garou and saw Anton walking off with continued laughter, which left only him and a cross-armed Marcel standing face to face.
"Say something, damn it. Say you're surprised. Say you're angry. Say you're proud. Something!"
Marcel glared at Garrett for an eternity before a smile creeped up one side of his mouth.
"Holding your tongue for once, so you finally know your place."
Garrett's eyes widened as he averted his gaze from Marcel, feeling himself shrink in his presence once more.
"Oh, Cosma, come now. Do you really think you deserve any credit for what's happened here?" "You don't deserve anything."
Garrett's fist tightened. He hadn't given the crow what it wanted, so why should he give Marcel the submission he wants?
"No, Well then, that was easy.
I deserve all of it. Marcel moved with lightning speed and rammed his boot straight into Garrett's chest, knocking him onto his back and the wind out of his lungs. Garrett rolled over and pushed himself to his knees, searching for breath. He had no more rage to tap into, and his natural shape-shifting aptitude only allowed him the glabro form. A large foot slammed into his back and pushed him back to the ground. Marcel roared at him in the Garut tongue with a Krynos maw.
You dare raise your voice to me? Every ounce of glory you achieve is my victory.
Marcel's foot grinded further into Garrett's back and overpowered any of his attempts to rise.
My guidance is what brought you here, and all shall witness it. You are nothing.
A Krynos claw clamped down on Garrett's neck, further restricting his efforts to resist.
Zuri is pushed by a desire to move away from your filth. You are nothing but a stepping stone for the strong to walk over on their path to greatness. Should you ever forget your role, then I will be right there to remind you.
Marcel's last words sounded like another voice was layered on top of it. The same voice that taunted and berated Garrett since his change. A searing pain in his heels prevented him from dwelling on it. He cried out as the unmistakable burn of silver severed his Achilles tendons. The pressure on his head and back subsided, allowing him to roll over and see Marcel holding his clave and shifting back to Hamid. The anger in his voice was gone, replaced only with familiar contempt.
Stay down.
Garrett didn't dare try to defy Marcel by standing on ruined ankles, but he had to say something. Every bit of his common sense told him not to, but that nagging in his head once again spurred him on. He spoke through gritted teeth.
I'm going to be a child of thunder, Marcel.
Garrett wasn't sure what exactly he meant when he said it, but being accepted by his patron had to mean something, and not even Marcel could deny it. He sheathed his clave and turned around.
You still need to undergo your rite of passage, whelp.
As Marcel walked away, Garrett turned back over to his stomach. He couldn't make it back to the sept house in the physical realm for risk of being spotted. He cried in agony as he crawled to the edge of the water and saw his boiling reflection.
Look, the face of a weakling.
It's the face of the Shadow Lord. Garrett slowly faded away.